So you guys seem to still be loving the 5 tips I wish I knew before I got working with epoxy video that we posted in April of 2020. Things been pulling in views hardcore, and we've built a bunch of more epoxy projects since then, and I wanted to share some more tips that we have with you. So here's 5 more tips for working with epoxy, plus a few bonuses at the end if you stick around. Tip number 1 is something that Sam and Jordan both forgot to do on our river table build recently, where we did the 26-foot long bar, and it almost came back to bite us. But this one, I tend to harp on all the time for anyone looking to get into resin, and that is keep it big and keep it thick. So when you're building your mold, or whatever you want to pour in, you need to consider all the variables going on with a deep pour project or an epoxy project. You have shrinkage, you have the amount of time it could take to get there, you could have, something that gets non-smooth or crinkly on an edge or whatever that might be. Therefore, you need to cut it down to size. Basically, the tip is don't build your box or your form to size, build it a little bit bigger. We tend to build ours to be about an inch bigger on every way around. That way we can get nice, crispy, clean edges on everything. The second part of this tip is to leave your pour thick. Some of the times we try to hit that exact dimension we want to be at when we're at our final piece, and that never goes well. In a few builds in the past, we have found that by doing a little bit of milling beforehand and then putting it into your mold will help you get thicker. But if you've got a potato chip or a piece of wood that's wonky and you want to pour that into a mold, you're better off leaving it wonky, clamping it or holding it down inside the mold, pouring around it, and then flattening. And you're always going to want to be thicker in that instance. So tip number 1, keep it big, keep it thick. Tip number 2, we covered this in our river tables tips, but if you're not building river tables and you're just building random shit with epoxy, it's gonna be how to properly calculate your pour. So for the most part, the kits that come out these days are all kind of pre-measured. The kits over here, you're gonna get 2-to-1 and 3-to-1, and they're gonna come and be able to just dump entire kits into whatever vessel you use to mix and then go from there. Well, sometimes you don't need all of that, or sometimes you're trying to make money and not just waste a bunch of materials. So if you've got a large area that you want to fill with resin, what you're going to want to do is you have to find the volume for this specific area. And the way we tend to do that is by finding the average size of it, adding 10% or so, and then calculating how much resin we're going to need. For a river table, we take a measurement about every 10 to 18 inches, wherever we kind of feel like the river's moving. And then however many measurements we take down the length of the table, you add those all together, then you divide those by the total number of measurements you took, and that'll give you the average width of your river. You're then gonna want to take the height and add a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch to it of what you want your river to be. And this will help compensate for if your live edge is spanning in or out, if it's straight up and down or whatever that might be, as well as it's better to have more than it is to not have enough, especially when it comes to using pigments. From there, you're gonna take your average width, multiply by the length, and multiply that by the thickness, and that will give you the cubic dimension of whatever you use. If you use centimeters, if you used inches, whatever it might be. And that volume can then be converted into whatever you are buying your epoxy in, and should give you a very close amount for the pour. So another little secondary tip here is take the type of resin you're using and look at what the ratio or the proportion is of it. Here we've got a thick set epoxy that's a 3-to-1 ratio. So that means it has 4 parts in it. Well, if your calculations come out to something like 7.5 liters and you need 3-to-1 ratio, just go ahead and make 8. You make 8 liters, and then you're gonna have the proper, 3 parts resin to 1 part hardener, just doubled over those however many you end up using to get you the volume you need. But you're always gonna be better off on having more instead of less. And it's also easier to do the math when you go into it with roundabout numbers, depending on what your ratio and mix are. If you're doing abstract shapes and sizes, you want to find the volume based on a shape that's not abstract. If it's close to a square or a rectangle, triangle, whatever it may be, you can use a volume calculator and do the same type of calculations that we would use on a river table in order to find the proper amount of epoxy you need. Tip number 3, you need to keep it cool. Everything is on fire! And by that I mean, don't disregard the ambient temperature of wherever you're pouring. This tends to be the biggest issue we have with our current setup because we don't have a ton of room and we don't have great temperature control or regulation in our shop. And we've had a bunch of issues pop up here in this last year and a half. Hurry! $1,000 of f***ing resin on the floor. When it comes to the speed in which resin's drying and cracking. Fortunately, we haven't had much cracking. We had one project that cracked in the last year and a half, which would have been our mitered waterfall table. But besides that, we have had things flash and off gas too quickly. Some good ways to make sure that you are keeping your temperature regular is one, you want to be running fans. We've got 2 floor fans and a ceiling exhaust fan that runs pretty much anytime we're pouring resin. We also have them directly pointed at the resin or the epoxy in whatever form it may be in order to move the off gas away from the resin as it dries. We've had situations like the 26-foot long bar top where we were right on the cusp of what the temperature in the room was supposed to be. And after we poured it, 6 hours later, we were still in the shop and the thing started to flash, started to harden way sooner than we anticipated it doing that. And all of that was because we had, one, we were doing way too much and we didn't have enough air circulation. 2, it was, like I said, on the cusp of what the manufacturer recommends for pouring temperatures. And 3, we were just being idiots and wanting to get it done quickly. So give yourself an opportunity to keep the temperature controlled. You'll see us pouring a lot up in our office. And that's because we do have a little bit of a better temperature control situation up there. The longer you let deep pour epoxy sit, the more gas will come out of it, the more bubbles will come out of it, and typically the better product you'll get. When your thing dries too fast, you'll get shrinkage and you'll start to see a lot more cupping. We get bubbles that come up on the outside of our table sometimes whenever we do a pour that essentially dries too quickly. But all those things can be avoided if you control the temperature and move the air around them. Let's get yourself some fans. Tip number 4. Invest in a vacuum pot. I always call it a pressure pot, but I'm stupid. It's a vacuum pot. What you do is you use this with a vacuum pump in order to remove the air that happens during the mixing of these, specifically these deep pour resins. Now it can work for the other thinner poured resins like this high performance here from Total Boat, but it's not necessarily something you're always gonna need for a thinner pour. Times that we like to use the vacuum pot are gonna be anytime we are encasing something in resin, 1, 2, or we're looking for crystal clear. If we want crystal clear, we are doing as much work as we can before we pour it to remove bubbles. What you'll find out happens is that whatever you're pouring over or in, air is gonna come out of there. And then going back to tip number 3, if it cures too quickly, none of those bubbles get to release. One of the huge differences in these deep pour epoxies is that they take a longer time to cure. That is very, very important to allow gas and bubbles to come out of it. The pressure pot gives you an advantage of pulling those out quicker sometimes, as well as if you're pouring or mixing with something like we did with the Bullet guitar. We poured one and it was just a bubble party in there and it was awful. And then we did one where we put it in the vacuum pot and it pulled out almost all of the bubbles. So it was a big difference there. I get that question a ton, is how do I eliminate bubbles in my projects? So we snagged this thing up on Amazon in order to do the Bullet Epoxy project, and we used it on the cereal bowl. We've used it a few times now, specifically for our smaller pours, and it works awesome. Great tool to have in the shop, especially if you're concerned with all the bubbles that come along with working with epoxy. I've got a link down below if you're interested in this one specifically. Pretty reasonable price, and I highly suggest. So before we jump into the 4th tip, gotta take a second and thank this week's sponsor, HelloFresh. If you aren't familiar with HelloFresh, it's a meal service company that prepares delicious meals for you to make at home and save you the time and hassle of having to go out and go shopping and go to the grocery store. My wife and I tend to enjoy cooking, or at least I enjoy cooking enough, but I would like to do it more often. Problem being though, is it's pretty time consuming to have to come up with a grocery list, come up with a recipe, go purchase everything, prep it, cook it, and then eat it. So HelloFresh cuts the bulk of that out of there by sending you pre-proportioned parts in order to execute on cooking a meal. Right now, they've got some delicious varieties that are unbelievable fall flavors that I absolutely adore. I like trying new things, and it's not the easiest to go out and about these days and do it, so it's awesome to be able to have it come in your home. HelloFresh offers a ton of variety, and you can get multiple meals of a different flavor profile to fit your needs and whatever you like. And because you're getting the pre-portioned meal, you're gonna have a lot less waste, which is great. It's much more sustainable, and it's really cool when you think about it to not have to throw away a bunch of the things that you were prepping in your meal. That's a good meatball, so you gotta try it. So if you want to change it up on your weeknight cooking, I highly suggest checking out HelloFresh. And they're so awesome, they're gonna give Yins 14 free meals over 5 boxes in order to get started. Using the code JohnMalecki14, you get all of that goodness. My wife and I are really enjoying it, and we'd love to pass that along to you. So check out HelloFresh. Thank you for sponsoring this build. Let's get back to some tips. Tip number 5, if you are going to pour any deep pour, you need to line the bottom of your mold where the epoxy will be with some sort of plastic barrier. We use Tyvek tape and it works very well for us. We've also started purchasing Tyvek tape in wider rolls that we're gonna try out here in the future. Packing tape works just as well. And a lot of us tend to think that the melamine will work because it's got a plasticky coating. It's not the case. We had a project recently, the waterfall table, that actually overheated, cracked, and melted to the melamine form. That became quite the pain. And if you go back and look at the video, you can see me taking out a timber framing chisel to crack all that melamine off of. And because that one was specifically poured to have an arm hanging down, I couldn't throw it on a flattening jig or do anything like that. And that all happened because of the melamine melting. And we've kind of learned our lesson now, and we cover the bottoms on all of our molds with either Tyvek tape, packing tape, a wide packing tape, or something that isn't just the bare melamine. Another great option that a lot of people like to use is gonna be a mold release. Now, this is a silicone mold release. We've had mixed reviews on how it's worked for us. We prefer the tape. The tape's going to be more expensive, I'll just say that straight up. But these projects are never gonna be cheap. Don't look at epoxy resin work as being cheap, because the epoxy is expensive, the molds are expensive, typically what you're pouring in around is expensive, and it's even worse when you don't invest the time into all the prep that helps it make it easier after it's built, and you have to go back and redo it, like for getting tape, like for getting mold release. So give the mold release a try. I personally would say tape it, then hit it with release, and that should help, but we've had wonderful results using the Tyvek tape or a similar tape. If you don't know what Tyvek tape is, it is a sheathing tape for home exteriors for the most part. So here in America, they wrap your house in what's called house wrap, and they tape it all up to keep a kind of a vapor barrier as well as a weather barrier. And they use this tape. So it's built to withstand the elements. It's built to withstand heat resistance. It's a good product. It is a little bit pricey, but it's definitely worth it. You don't want to run into that headache. And because I'm feeling generous, here's a few bonus tips for you. 1, don't use wood with bark on it, ever, period. Get the bark off of it. The bark will fall off. And even if you think it looks cool and looks good, I am sorry, but it's not going to work. And you're never gonna get a river table with bark on it, because then the epoxy bonds to the bark, and then that pulls off and everything moves and it cracks, and it's not good. Get rid of the bark. Bonus tip number 2, when you're caulking your mold, we tend to use a fast drying caulk. We use black. We always use black because it's easier to see, 1, 2, and we found it releases a little bit better. But don't trust the time on the silicone drying. We've run into a few instances where we were in a hurry, we wanted to pour, we put it in there, let it dry for, over 30 minutes as it suggests, and we still had leaking issues within our molds because it wasn't fully set up. Do yourself a favor, let your silicone dry overnight in your molds. It will save you tons of headaches down the line. Bonus tip 3, use dry wood. A lot of people think you can, because you're putting it in resin, that you can use whatever wood you want, and it's not the case. If you use wet wood, it will eventually try to dry out. The weirdest thing, doesn't want to stay wet. But because it's dying, it'll shrink, and then you'll have cracks and you'll have issues. You'll have blushing issues with your finish. It just isn't good. Don't use wet wood, ever.
Even if there's a fire.
Bonus tip number 4, when you're using pigment, you gotta know that a powdered pigment is gonna act differently than a liquid pigment. Be aware that a liquid pigment will bleed into whatever you're using it in. Therefore, you wanna seal whatever you're pouring it in before you pour it. We recently did a shuffleboard for a buddy of mine, and we used black dye on just the letters and numbers on the surface. We had some bleeding issues because I completely forgot that we were using liquid pigment instead of a powder pigment, and we use a powder pigment a ton, pretty much, I would say 90% of the time. Because of that, we had to go back and fix all of those and actually bring the table down slightly in thickness, and it wasn't good. So if you're using a liquid pigment, you need to seal before you pour. If you're using a powder, you should be good without it. And that's gonna be a wrap on these 5 tips. If you've got any more, leave them down below and let me know. I'm here to help. I love inspiring you guys. And if you didn't get enough of this video, I've got a whole playlist of epoxy stuff for you right here. Check it out.